what I wanted, well, what the topic for today is sort of the plans for reopening and more just to answer people's questions, and particularly in terms of how we are making these decisions. And Sarah and Brig are with us this morning, and they're part of our reopening committee, two of the doctors on that committee. And I also, in the chat of your Zoom call, I put up a link to the website that has sort of a dashboard of all the key statistics. And I know I'd looked at it yesterday, and I looked at it just looked at it a minute ago to get the link, and the numbers are worse today than they were yesterday. And it's been like that literally every day for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And so our numbers are continuing to head in the wrong direction, and which is why we've had to roll back the sort of the in-person inside worship that we were hoping to be able to do, particularly now that the weather has started to turn. Although today the weather was quite beautiful for the 8 o'clock service, not quite as good as yesterday, but it was still pretty cool. But my understanding, since I haven't actually experienced it, is that St. Louis winters can get a little miserable.
Just a little.
And the idea of standing around outside or sitting around outside in inclement weather doesn't really appeal to me at all.
At least you don't get ice like Oklahoma. We get a lot of sleet from Oklahoma.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and what we are contemplating, or sort of the planning, and all of our plans are very flexible, because just in terms of how we respond to the pandemic and the weather and all of those kinds of things. But in December, what we're working on doing is having one service at 10:30 rather than having the 8 o'clock, because it's getting colder and colder. But Sarah and Brig, do you have any comments that you'd like to make, and then we can just have a conversation?
Yeah. I don't, I'd like to give just a little bit of background, and Sarah can help me out. Rob, Jeannie Davis, our senior warden, formed a steering committee for reopening. Rob, was that in June that we formed that? May or June?
Yeah.
It was early on. It was, yeah, I think it was that early, Brig.
Yeah. And a big part of that. Go.
At any rate, the bishop who had closed down in-person worship for the diocese set up some guidelines to use for reopening for having in-person worship. And they included the infection rate, the positivity rate in the community, the new cases on a given day. And as the summer wore on, and this committee met virtually, initially weekly, and then we went to every other week. And towards the end of the summer, it became clear things were quieting down, and we looked at the possibility of reopening, which we did with in-person worship in the driveway in front of the porch starting in September. And I looked up last night, the daily new case record in September was 14.4. By October 6th, this had risen to 24.5. And yesterday, before I went to bed last night, I looked up on the COVID Act Now website. The new cases were 46.5, a dangerous critical level. Our infection rate, and the bishop asked that the infection rate be less than 1. Last night it was over 1 and increasing. The positive case rate, cases positive in the numerator and the denominator, the number of persons tested, I was interested to see last night, it's 8.1% positivity rate last night. That is decreasing just a little bit. But overall, you know, the threat of COVID is markedly increased. And we had a steering committee meeting last week, and we were hoping to go to in-person worship in the church. And Sarah and I, just in light of these numbers, there was no way we could do this safely. And I propose we do outdoor worship again next week on November 15th. And then after that, until such time as the numbers allow us safely to have some in-person worship in the church. We're going to be looking at being able to have Christmas Eve services, maybe abbreviated, and it may have to be outside. This is going to be a fluid situation, but we're going to continue to look at it actively and regularly. And our committee is meeting on a regular basis, and those are the numbers we're going to use to guide us. And Sarah, maybe you might want to add something, but that's my little summary.
I think it's an excellent summary, Brig. It encapsulates what we've been trying to do for the last, 4 or 5 months, recognizing the importance
Right.
of many people of getting back to the church in person. But what we've always wanted to do is to do this safely for our congregation. And as I've thought about things, when we made the decision to go to in-person outdoor worship, we were in a place where things were kind of in that sweet spot over the summer, where we had little tick-ups, but not really many hospitalizations. If people remember, in July and August, there was some increase in the number of cases, but it was a lot of the young kids, and there were concerns about going back to school. But Brig and I were really quite comfortable, because in the hospital settings, we weren't really seeing as many really sick people. And we've enjoyed this time outside, and we're hopeful, looking back a month or so ago, that things would continue in the correct direction, but it's really just gone the opposite direction. And the numbers don't lie. The numbers are heading upwards. But Brig, and my experience and the experience of physicians around in the community has been that not only are we seeing numbers go up, but we're also seeing numbers of people hospitalized going up. So that not only is it young people who can get quite sick, but often are not nearly as affected, but more vulnerable members of our population are being really affected. And so we just really didn't feel that bringing our congregation, even small numbers, inside where there was increased risk for transmission of the virus was the safe thing to do at this point.
And just to point out, Brig, you looked at the numbers yesterday and it was like 48, 49. It's 52 this morning.
I just pulled it up.
Just
Too.
like,
It's awful.
It's and the other number I think I find quite fascinating, sort of as sort of the engineering side of me, that the infection rate of it's now 1.25, which means that one infected person is infecting 1.25 other people. So, means that we're on if one person gets infected, more than one person will get infected as a result of that. So as long as that number's over 1, we're heading really in the wrong direction. And then I think that those numbers, it's not just about being in church, it's about everything that we do.
Yeah.
And how we...
I will give you another number to illustrate how we don't have a handle on this problem. Sarah and I both work at St. Luke's Hospital. It's part of the consortium in our community that includes BJC, Mercy, SSM, and St. Luke's. And when the pandemic hit us last spring, and we were all worried about demand outstripping the resources we had to treat this disease, hospitalized patients at St. Luke's grew to the low 30s per day. Over the summer, we dropped down to as few as 4 patients in the hospital, in St. Luke's Hospital with COVID. And I got an update of St. Luke's cases yesterday. Yeah, well, Sarah just said it. There were 59 COVID cases in the hospital at St. Luke's yesterday. That's almost 100% more than our highest previous number last spring.
They also think there's a 10-day gestation period from everybody voting, so there might be a third wave or whatever you want to call it from everybody voting, getting out and voting.
Another spike. Yeah, Sarah and I both believe that November and December are going to be the cruelest months, the hardest months to overcome. That's what the public health experts seem to say, and we can all hope maybe we'll see the curve bend in the right direction after these 2 cruel months.
I think that's true, Brig. And I think, when we think about this, this is not our new normal for the rest of our lives. I don't know a great deal about the details of novel therapeutics and things about vaccines and everything else, but we certainly have gotten much better at treating this disease than we were 6 or 8 months ago. I think probably all of us now can name people, if not in our own family, but contacts who have been affected by this. And I know people who are vulnerable, who have been hospitalized, have been treated with things that have helped them to do much better than they would have done if they were affected by this 6 months ago. And I had a hopeful conversation with actually another physician member of our church community, who is a physician but works with some of the most vulnerable populations in St. Louis. And she said that their pharmacists and people that they had worked with talked about the concept of vaccines and ordering, and I am not on top of that, but there are rays of hope that suggest, as Briggs says, if we can make it through these next few months, that this is something that we can overcome as a community. But this is a time, certainly at church, but in the rest of our lives as well, to take measures of the risks that we're taking and be careful and cautious, so that we can protect all of those around us.
And
Can I ask a question? How do we make our decisions? Is there a diocesan directive from the bishop, or are parishes allowed to make, autonomous decisions about how they're going to have church services?
My understanding, and Rob, you can speak to this, is that there have been recommendations from the bishop with very clear directives as to what Briggs spelled out, that there are thresholds in terms of positivity rates, in terms of numbers of cases, that the bishop would very strongly like to see us below before safely returning to worship. And we took those into account when we made the decision to come back in person outside, when it was safe and comfortable in the fall to be outside. Those are not mandates. They're, to my understanding, Rob, you can speak to this, in the very earliest waves, it was absolutely clear we could not be open. But my understanding is that we're trying our very best to follow those guidelines. Not every church in the community is, but we are trying our best to be adherent to those guidelines.
I think that the thing we have to remember with all of this is that the Episcopal Church here in Missouri is part of America. And we are almost first and foremost Americans, and the bishop can say what he wants. Getting the churches to do what the bishop says, you've got to remember, we're Americans. So there are churches, there are clergy who, and just, I fully support the bishop actually, and the decisions that he's made. And again, the criteria that he put together weren't just something that he dreamt up as a bishop. It was using medical expertise in the community and the diocese, like we're using our medical expertise within our parish, so that and that they were also heavily using the advice from the public health officials and what have you. So, but I would also say that it has to also make, to me, the bishop could say, hey, have at it, do whatever you want. And personally, as a member of this community, and I just don't think it's safe. And I know that there are some churches that are worshiping inside, and I know there are other churches that were worshiping inside that have stopped, have gone back to doing virtual. So I think the way people are responding to the diocesan office's guidance, they are taking it as guidance, but ultimately it's becoming a parochial decision. It's possible if it does get radically crazy, and I can imagine if one of the congregations that is still open becomes a hotspot, then all sorts of, it's likely to get more mandated. But I don't want to wait till one of us becomes a hotspot. That just personally, and as sort of as the theoretical leader of the church, it's kind of like I just can't, with any sense of wisdom and compassion, I have absolutely no interest in anyone getting sick. And I think one of the big frustrations for many people here at St. Peter's is when I look at the people who are probably longing to get back to worshiping in person. More often than not, it is the older community who maybe don't have as many connections that they used to have, social connections, and just the feeling isolated. And it's that community that is really missing sort of in-person engagement, and yet they're also in that higher risk category. And so that becomes a challenge. And so I would encourage each one, if you know someone who's older or maybe in there, just give them a call. Say, hey, how you doing? And just connect. Because I think there are people who are feeling very isolated. And it's, I'll admit, I mean, I just came from the 8 o'clock service. As the priest of a parish, it's hard to put into words what it means to be able to put the body of our Lord in your hands and to look you in the eye as I do that, and to be part of that connection. And I think of how important eating together is. In my leadership training and development over the last 20 years that I've been doing, one of the things that I find really fascinating is effective teams have learned how to eat together. And I'm not quite sure which comes first, the eating or the becoming effective, but I think it's a both and. And so, and we think of Thanksgiving and just what it's like to have a meal with somebody and to have conversation around a table. And I find it really fascinating that when Jesus said to remember me, he didn't say read your Bibles. He didn't say to a whole bunch of other stuff. He said, have a meal together to remember me. And I find that really powerful. And I think that's part of why the Eucharist is so meaningful to us, and why it is such a huge connection, and it is what we are missing. And yet at the same time, if that becomes unsafe, I just don't think it's either wise or compassionate to get together to do that. And the only thing that I've found, and I mentioned this in my blog yesterday, that I found when I experience that frustration, just to remember, and all the different activities that we're not able to do, when you feel that frustration, bring to mind somebody that you love, your children, a friend, a loved one, a member of St. Peter's. Put together in your mind that person that you love, and just realize the sacrifice that you're making is an expression of love for that person. Because as Brig and Sarah was saying, from my perspective, when you look at the data and the way it's going, this is not just about us reopening for worship. This is about how we care for one another in our society. And as a society, we need to stop doing some of the things we're doing. And even at a national level, that's become almost something that individuals have to do. Because I seriously doubt that any politician today, I don't care what side of the camp you're on, any politician is going to try and shut down the country again in the way that we did
Right.
back when the pandemic began.
Rob,
Yeah, Matt.
I've always thought that it was the best is to err on the side of caution.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what we're doing. I think we should continue that.
And I would say, Matt, it's erring on the side of caution, but I would, to me, it's about being smart and compassionate, that it's not just, yes, I'm afraid of getting infected, or I'm afraid of people that I love getting infected. I'm not going to live out of a place of fear when there are some things that I can do to reduce that probability.
Let me, I found in this pile of papers that I brought to our little virtual get together this morning, directive from the diocese, assembling for in-person public worship permissible as of September 15th. And the three things that Sarah and I and Rob and Jeannie are the vestry is looking at, the number of COVID-19 cases in our county has decreased for 14 days or is held steady with a mere handful of cases, 5 or fewer. Okay, Rob just told you that yesterday new cases were 46 or 48. So that's point number one. Number two, the infection rate is less than 1. Rob just told you the infection rate in our community now is 1.24. The positive test rate is less than 10%, preferably closer to 3%. Well, in the numbers I shared with you this morning, the one hopeful number is the positivity rate yesterday was 8.19%. It's under 10%. We're nowhere near down around 3%, which we were a short couple of months ago. So these numbers can change quickly, and we hope all of us hope that they change in the right direction sooner rather than later. But until they do, I think St. Peter's is doing the wise thing to do. Take caution, like Matt just said.
Well, as a parent with a child in school, he teaches in Parkway. And the day that they opened up to elementary kids, the first day he knew of one case. A I think there were 3 cases of kids. Next day it went up to 5. And the kids have been taken out of school, and he doesn't know where the numbers are now. As of yesterday, he was telling me that there are at least 4 teachers he knows who have been sent home for quarantine. And I'm really concerned about the schools because those kids are doing all they can to keep kids safe, and teachers, but putting them together all day long in a school is a difficult thing to do. And I sort of hope he's worried because he doesn't want to bring anything home to mother, which I appreciate. But I am concerned at the elevated rate of all the numbers you've talked about and what Parkway is going to do, because he teaches strings. So he wasn't involved in the first couple of weeks, but he was supposed to start back with a mixed bag of virtual and in school kind of classes. And he thinks they're still doing that this coming week, but he's expecting they're going to probably close right before Thanksgiving. And in a way, I hope so, because Thanksgiving is a dangerous holiday when we want to be together. And so I'm concerned for the school kids and the school teachers.
I have a concern too for the hospital staff. If there's not hospital staff for that free bed, if everybody gets super sick and it just keeps increasing, the hospital staff is limited. So they have to do triage and turn people away that might be the sickest because there's no hope of their coming out of it. So when the hospitals hit that brick wall, it's just awful in human terms, and it's like the Exxon Valdez trying to turn the rudder. Once you get all this infection rate, it's hard to uninfect. So the more we do collectively, as Americans, we need to keep those beds free for the most sick and the elderly, instead of not wearing our mask and being selfish.
I think that's a good point, Jeff. And absolutely, I think it's a concern to keep the hospitals safe and not empty, but not full of patients unnecessarily. But I would reassure you at this point, Brig and I are getting updates several times a week, and I think the hospitals and the hospital systems have a much better handle on what the situation is than we all did 6 or 7 months ago. And we have extremely broad systems in place to think about how to safely take care of patients, think about how to safely take care of our healthcare workers, the nurses, the staff, the custodians, as well as those of us as physicians. And so in some ways, whereas the last weekend in March when I was on call and sort of terrified to go in to the hospital, in some ways going to the hospital, I feel much safer now than I do going to the grocery store, because I know there are all of these rules in place for everybody to wear a mask and shields and stuff that makes us look funny but keeps us all safe. So somebody sent me a message and said, is it safe to go to the doctor right now? And I would say, yes, absolutely, it's safe. It's very different than when we shut everything down in April and May. But if you're going to the doctor and and for an elective problem and you have cold symptoms, don't call the doctor and say, I don't feel really well and I'm coming in to see about my knee operation next March. I think I'm going to wait until a day when I'm feeling better. The hospitals also have plans in place to try and be prepared differently again, Jeff, than we were in March when this was all kind of sprung on us. So they have, incident command teams whose jobs it is to look at these numbers on a daily, if not more frequent basis, and think about, hiring extra nurses or turning a PACU into an ICU or retrofitting ICU beds. And so we are not at a place where I'm concerned right now that we're overrunning our hospital capacity, but it is absolutely important that we as a community think about ways to keep the numbers down. I think about St. Louis really fondly. When I think about the history of all this, and you all probably know the history of the Spanish flu, 103 years ago. But St. Louis was really a unique city then because we kept the numbers kind of at this lowish level for most of the time course of that disease, where there are cities like Philadelphia where it just skyrocketed and went crazy. And we're rising here and we're high here, but we still are nowhere near the place where some of other cities around the country have been over the course of the last 6 or 8 months. And my goal is not to obliterate this virus from our community. I think it's gonna be almost impossible to do that for a long, long time. But we wanna turn the curve of these numbers down so that we can get back to a place where we feel the way we did a couple of months ago. And decisions like this are just a part of that. And our hope is that everybody thinks carefully about these things. None of us want to be hunkered down. It gets tiresome, and but it's what we're doing from what Rob says is a compassionate basis to keep everybody safe.
You're mentioning compassion. It reminds me, I have several friends and relations who are hospitalized or who are in rehab, nursing home kind of situations. And the hardest thing on them and their families is that they can't be together. And that's very difficult. Not everybody is equipped to Zoom with friends or do some of the other kinds of things. And it's not quite the same. It's not providing the same feeling.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Nanette, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I woke up. My husband's actually working all day on a software launch for the bank. And so I said, I'm going to church and I'm going to I even knew what you were talking about. It doesn't pertain to me because I'm sitting in a very snowy Utah. It's our first snow. But I did want to tell you about Utah after Sarah and Jeff spoke. It is difficult. And too, Donna, it's difficult to maintain the vigilance. But let me tell you what happened in Utah because people got tired of it and decided to just do what they wanted. And in a lot of places, masks were optional. I didn't go to any of those places, but our positivity rate is over 20% now.
Yes.
Our hospitals, they said when we hit 75% that we didn't have the staff to actually go to 100, but we're at 100 now. So people aren't getting taken as care of as well, simply because people are overworked and understaffed. And so I guess I'm just a voice of saying what you're doing and what you've decided to do, as hard as it is, and as hard as we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but there is one. That it's very important to keep it where Sarah was talking about, because when it gets out of hand, you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. And that's the tough thing. Now, I don't know how we're going to get it down. We're 1 in 5 people is positive. And so it makes any space that you go into more hazardous. My son was going to have a baby shower this weekend in Dallas, and I still had a plane ticket when they called it off. And I thought about going down there, but I just decided not to. So it's very, very hard to keep doing those decisions and staying isolated, but it's very worth it. And Missouri's doing so well compared to, to us here in Utah.
I'd like to thank everybody for all these comments, and it's good to see you, Nanette. I'm trying to tell my family, because we're having difficult conversations right now about holidays and Thanksgiving. It's one season. It's one season of having to do things different. And it may be a long season in terms of the virus, but it's not forever. And it's just, if we do all the right things now, we're going to come through this. And we do all have to have hope, but it's just one Thanksgiving we won't be together, and possibly one Christmas. And at least being outside at church, outdoor worship is a positive.
Yes.
There was a very sad 5-year-old girl who passed away. They took them into the hospital, and the doctor said she should do okay, but she died within like 12 hours. So again, everybody's different, but the loss of a single life, you know, if somebody doesn't wear their mask, you can't really tell somebody to wear a mask, but you know, that 5-year-old girl might have been infected by somebody not wearing a mask. So the sad thing about holidays and COVID is you think the young might be immune, but if you're the parent of that 5-year-old girl that passed in 24 hours, that you know, it's like getting run over by
Someone had,
a car.
someone had said that children tend to be more asymptomatic if they do get it, but it doesn't manifest itself openly, which makes them a wonderful vector.
I guess I'd like clarification. You know, if in the medical community, if there is still a consistency of thinking about, you know, wearing the mask, washing your hands, and that you can go out. And I know one of my daughters is like, you come in the door and put all your clothes in the washing machine. But, you know, kind of what has emerged that you think is something that you can do so you can still at least do some basic things in life. Has that information stayed consistent, or is that just, we hope it works?
No, it definitely does work. If you were masked, if the persons you're in contact with are masked, even if one of those persons has COVID, you're safe. The risk of transmission is very low. So that works. Everybody can do that. And there's all the other guidelines that you're all very familiar with. But masks and avoiding large crowds is probably the best of all those list of guidelines that CDC and public health has recommended. Healthcare workers that get COVID, it turns out they don't get it at the hospital. Like Sarah said, you're safe there because everybody's masked. Medical personnel, patients, visitors. If a healthcare worker gets COVID, it's usually outside of the workplace, at home. Their kid from college comes home from the weekend and they get it at home, not when everybody's masked.
And if you're inside I see people now, they go to dinner, and once you get there, you take your mask off. And so you're sitting across the table. I've wondered about, you know, how safe is that? I mean, I guess you're 2 feet apart.
Yeah. You know, I think if you're in a crowd of, you know, 5 or less, you're probably going to be fine. I mean, I try to keep the distancing as best you can, but as Jeannie said, you know, a large family gathering for Thanksgiving, I think we'll have to sacrifice that this year. You know, a lot.
To go back to the hospitals, are there enough PPE things now?
Yeah.
There is, yeah, there definitely is right now. ICU capacity is safe for sure at the moment.
One thing I thought we needed to do more as a community is get a sense of, you know, what in history people have had to work their way through over a number of years, and they did it and made it. And, you know, I'll just speak for me. I'm 78, but except for polio, I really haven't had like a World War II of 6 years, or a Dust Bowl of 10 years, or a depression of 10 years. And yet, you know, we worked our way through it as people. And I think a sense of history is something more that we need. And, you know, for people to realize that, you know, sometimes society has this, and it can be a long time, but everybody made it with a lot less than we have as far as like technology. Just think what that has done to at least have a tiny link for being together. But I thought in some of the writings, you know, to the parishioners to say, you know, history has showed that society makes it through tough times, and we're in one.
Well, I think that clearly, Linda, I would totally agree that human beings are actually incredibly resilient. You know, we're in the midst of tragedy all around us in lots of ways. And you know, as Jeff was saying, one child is, it's horrendous. But if you were to take a step back from just that immediacy of that one event, and you look at humanity, we are incredibly resilient. And even as individuals. And, you know, when you think of all that you've gone through in the course of your life, and whatever that might be, and you can think right now of the worst thing that's ever happened to you. The reality is you survived that, and you have within you a power that is greater than the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And I think that's when I've spent a little bit of time working in medical hospitals, but I think with the doctors, you know, I find it just amazing when you see these people who are just incredibly sick, and yet they come through with some horrendous things, that there's that power of the life that is within us is mind-blowing. And I think it's the big question for me is, how do I wisely align my sort of ego's will to that life that's within me? Because often that's where I think the competition is. But just to be aware of how resilient we human beings are, and to be smart. And I've no doubt that we're going to get through this.
Rob, one thing though, if I look, I think it's like 14 on this call, maybe 12. I worry more about parishioners that don't do internet, don't do, you know, reaching out. What is there going to be in writing to them in the mail, or more reaching out that way, U.S. postal mail?
Have fun at Children's Chapel. I will be missing it today.
Good, Rob. I'll see you at 10:30. The news, we've published a magazine that should be, have you received that, or is it still at the printer?
I haven't received it.
I have not received it.
I think it's actually at the printer at the moment. It's
Coming in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, so that there will be a sort of the quick and up. Most of our correspondence obviously is by email, and I realize, Linda, that some of our parishioners are not connected via email and to the internet as you suggest. Will be a mailing going out in the next couple of weeks. But I think it does come back also to the thing that if you know somebody who's maybe not as well connected as you are, just give them a call and connect with them. I need to sign off because I need to go and get ready for the 10:30 service. One of the people I just want to have a big shout out to is Kelly. Kelly oversaw the writing, the documentation that we had to put together, and all the protocols to stay safe. And there are pages and pages and pages of the stuff. And Kelly coordinated a lot of that and did an incredible job. She has an eye for detail that I certainly don't have. Really appreciative of her ability to integrate the work of the reopening committee, and did a huge job, and is still doing a huge job on that. So a big thank you to Briggs, Sarah, Michael Newport, Jeannie, and Catherine Matthews were on the committee, and they have put an enormous amount of time into both looking at the statistics, seeing what we can do, and then coming up with strategies and protocols to make it safe for us to, say, gather out in the parking lot, to have the church open for private devotions, and what we need to do to clean after those events and those kinds of activities. So actually enormous amount of work has gone into that. And so big thank you to that committee. I trust you all have a really great fall Sunday. And hasn't the last week been glorious?
Yes.
The political climate may have been absolutely insane, but the weather was wonderful.
Yes.
So I hope you get to enjoy today. Take care, folks.
Yeah. Good day to everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hi,
Thank you, guys. Good
thank you.
Thank you.